I'm Bob Parker. I served in the co-op department, directed it since the late 60s until I retired in 1991. Bill joined the co-op department about that early time, and he had come in from Cincinnati where he was involved with the state and the local agencies, and he knew his way around very well. He moved in here and immediately moved into a whole series of things that a co-op factor member was involved in very early on. He was working with students on a one-to-one basis. He had about 100 advisors. He was working with employees, mainly in Washington, D.C. Maybe 50 to 75 employees, that all depends. He was orienting our students, but most importantly, he was out finding new employees. We always needed more employees. Our enrollments were building on those days. As the enrollments grew, we needed more full-time jobs for our students all over the country. He constantly worked with his employers, and one of the most important aspects of our employers, they weren't just employers who hired a student. The guy who I worked with in that job was just like a person sitting in the chair next to me or in the office next to me. We had a one-to-one relationship that made it work. If in some way they could help us out, they'd try. If there's some way we could help them out, we'd try. We worked very well together with all of our employees. So in 68, 67, Bill left and went back to Washington, D.C. He worked with the federal, he worked with a number of employees. I wanted to tell you first what some of them were. The Federal Drug Administration, Common Civil Rights, Committee on Civil Rights, the Library of Congress, Office of Education, the Smithsonian, Social and Rehabilitation Service. These were just a sample of what was available that he was working with in a community like that. The last month before he left, he was appointed, still there? He was appointed to a new position of Dean of Community Services, which didn't seem to work very well. It was a new position. He left and returned to Washington. He resigned. And I kept up my connection with him because we were good friends and worked a lot, one-on-one, not only in the office, but out in the community. I had an opening open up in 75, and I let him know about it. I think he was interested in coming back, and he applied for it, and he was the final candidate who was selected for that position. So he returned. And one of the things that was a big help to him, he worked with all these various government agencies. He'd been involved in the Department of Labor. He knew all about federal employment practices. Most importantly, he got to know a number of federal personnel that had major connections, and he kept those major connections. I worked for a year in Washington myself a number of years ago, and I thought we ought to require every New York student to work here for a quarter, so they get to know how good or bad or how you can use the federal system. He returned that year, and we just started our New Directions program, which dealt primarily with minorities and disadvantaged students, and he brought a new local and strong personality to help in those programs. He did. He stayed with me for quite a while. One of the things I was able to do after we started that new program is I was able to get some funding to help other developing institutions, primarily black and developing new institutions. The Afro-American colleges were the primary success was. As Bill was working and had a great knowledge, I asked him if he'd work with me part-time and help as he visited those schools. where we went in and we assessed their programs, made suggestions, tried to assist them with getting their own grants and assistance from the federal government. The earlier co-op grants we all started with were $2,000 to $5,000. Now they were up to over 50 or 100 and more. So we were able to get a lot of those schools back on the funding track. So Bill left this position and went to other local involvement with new organizations in this country, in this area, helped with a lot of those things. And Bill had I found one note about Bill. When he returned, some faculty organization in Antioch, some memo or newsletter or something went out, and there was a note about Bill. He was asked why he had returned to Antioch. And he said, "My life work is in co-op education, and I'm high on this place as a leading exponent of it. As co-op education burgeons all over the country, Antioch must take a leading role in shaping the future of that kind of education. And I want to contribute to that. I also want to use my strength, my skills in the integration of work and study." And he surely did.
Joe Kennard couldn't make it, but he did send something that I think is real important. He said he first met Bill Chappelle in the fall of 1975, shortly after entering Antioch. He was assigned to me as a co-op advisor, or as assigned to him, I can't remember which. The salient point is that we bonded almost immediately, since I was a transfer student and older than my fellow students. Bill and I spent countless hours dissecting and discussing issues of the day. He was well aware of my love of politics and law, and in the winter of 1976, Bill arranged a green co-op job for me with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights under Law in Washington, D.C. It was a fantastic opportunity, but paled in comparison to what followed. Summer 1976 was coming to an end, and I had yet to find a co-op job for the fall. Bill brought to my attention a new job in Columbus, Ohio, with Antioch alum Leonard Fishman. The job involved politics, my true love. However, it also meant working for a Southern politician, which I refused to do. Bill, in his inimitable style, sat me down and explained how significant the opportunity and looking at the larger picture was. He advised me to put aside my biases and at least visit Columbus before making up my mind. I listened to Bill and went to Columbus. In Columbus, I met with Leonard Fishman. After interviewing me, Leonard asked me to wait a few moments while he disappeared into an office. He returned shortly and led me to an adjoining office to meet Dan Horgan, campaign state coordinator. Dan and I had a good conversation, and yet I returned to Yellow Springs uncommitted. Bill and I met again in his office. We discussed the pros and cons of accepting the job. I consented. Bill then called Leonard Fishman and explained that Mr. Kennard is aware of the trade-offs and required to be successful in this job and would be an excellent choice. I went to work for this Southern politician who became the 39th President of the United States, Jimmy Carter. Years later, in 1980, my grandfather, Daniel Herbert Kennard Sr., took great pride in looking at a photo of me taken in the White House with the President and Mrs. Carter. He was proud of the fact that as a grandson of slaves, he had lived long enough to see his grandson work for a president. I owe that moment to Bill Chappelle. My God rest his wonderful soul.